Hey guys, tonight I want you to go ahead and dim the lights. Maybe adjust your pillow. Maybe question your life choices just a little, but in a calm way. Let your shoulders sink, let your jaw unclench. We are not storming castles tonight. We are not watching empires burn. We are simply drifting very, very far back. Back before emails, before taxes, before royal family group chats went horribly wrong. Tonight, we are floating gently into the deep past, into a world without kings, without palaces, without anyone arguing on the internet about bread prices. We're going to ask a very simple question. What did early humans actually do all day? Because when you picture them, you probably imagine one of two things. Either they are sprinting dramatically from a woolly mammoth like it's an Ice Age action movie, or they are sitting around a fire, grunting vaguely, inventing absolutely nothing. As usual, reality is much quieter, much slower, and honestly, much more relatable. So let's begin. First, we need to gently step into a time long before cities, long before farming, long before anyone decided wheat was worth ruining their back over. We're talking about people who lived tens of thousands of years ago, some of them belonging to our own species, Homo sapiens, others like the Neanderthals, all of them very human in ways that might surprise you. Now here's the first thing that might disappoint your inner action movie director. Early humans were not constantly fighting for survival every second of the day. They were not waking up at dawn, screaming, grabbing spears, and charging into chaos. Most days were slow, very slow. In fact, anthropologists who study modern hunter-gatherer societies, groups that live in ways somewhat similar to early humans, have found something mildly shocking. They don't work as much as we do. I know, it's rude. Groups like the Sand People of southern Africa, for example, often spend around 3 to 5 hours a day gathering food. That's it. Not 14 hours, not 9 to 5, more like 9 to lunchtime. The rest of the day? Resting, talking, fixing tools, napping, telling stories, watching children attempt questionable decisions. So if we carefully apply this to early humans, a typical day might look something like this. You wake up. There is no alarm clock, no notification noise, no meeting. You wake because the light shifts or because someone rolls over too dramatically. You stretch. It's cold or warm, depends on the Ice Age situation. There's a fire nearby. Fires were precious. They were warmth, protection, cooking, and social glue all wrapped into one flickering orange package. Keeping that fire alive was important. Not glamorous, but important. Someone probably checks the embers first thing, blows gently, adds small twigs, because no one wants to be the person who let the fire die overnight. That would be awkward. Then comes food planning. And here's the thing. Early humans did not always hunt large animals, despite what every documentary with dramatic music suggests. Mammoth hunts were rare and risky. You don't casually poke a multi-ton furry tank with a stick unless you absolutely have to. Most food came from gathering, plants, roots, tubers, nuts, berries, seeds, yes, insects. Calm down. Protein is protein. In many early societies, gathering, often done by women, provided the majority of daily calories. Hunting was impressive. Gathering was reliable. So a group might split up. A few adults head out to gather plants. They know the land intimately, which berries are safe, which roots need roasting, which patch has already been picked clean. This knowledge was not written down. It lived in memory, passed down through stories, through watching, through walking the same land over and over. Children probably went along too. And here's something gentle but important. Childhood in early human societies was not a constant training montage for danger. It was long, playful, exploratory. Human children take forever to grow up.
That's not a design flaw, it's part of the plan. Children played. They imitated adults. They practiced throwing small sticks long before anyone handed them a real spear. They learned by watching. A lot of the day would involve walking, slow walking, looking, digging, chatting. There was no rush-hour traffic, no productivity app tracking steps, just movement across familiar ground. Meanwhile, maybe a small hunting party goes off in another direction, not to heroically tackle a mammoth, maybe to track small game, rabbits, birds, deer if they're lucky. Hunting required patience, hours of following tracks, reading subtle signs in the dirt. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was quiet concentration, and often it failed, which is why gathering was so crucial. By midday, people would likely return to a central camp. Now picture this camp, not a permanent house with a mailbox, maybe temporary shelters, maybe simple structures made of wood, hides, or branches. Some early humans were nomadic. They moved with the seasons, following animal migrations, following ripening plants. Others in resource-rich areas might stay longer, but nothing like a city, no fences, no property disputes about lawn boundaries. In camp, food preparation begins. Roots get cleaned and roasted, nuts get cracked, meat, if any, gets shared. Sharing is key. Early humans survived because they cooperated. If one hunter had a lucky day, everyone benefited. Tomorrow, maybe it's someone else's turn. There's evidence that even injured or elderly individuals were cared for. Neanderthal skeletons show healed injuries that would have required group support, meaning compassion is ancient, very ancient. After eating, the afternoon might stretch into slower activities.
Tool making. Stone tools didn't just appear magically. Knapping stone, carefully striking flakes off a core, takes skill, focus, practice. Someone might sit, rhythmically shaping a blade, tap, turn, tap, turn. Children would watch, maybe try, probably mess it up. That's fine. Others might repair clothing. Yes, clothing. In colder regions, humans wore animal hides, carefully scraped and softened. Sewing needles made of bone have been found from tens of thousands of years ago, which means someone was sitting there, very calmly, stitching fur garments so everyone wouldn't freeze. There's something deeply relatable about that. The world outside might be wild and vast, but someone still has to fix the coat. And then there's social time. This is the part we often underestimate. Early humans talked, a lot. Language likely developed gradually, but by the time of early Homo sapiens, complex language almost certainly existed. They told stories about hunts, about ancestors, about that time someone fell into a river and tried to pretend it was intentional. Storytelling wasn't entertainment in the modern sense. It was education, memory, identity. It's how you remember which valley floods in spring, which plant makes you sick, which animal migrates when the air turns sharp. As evening approaches, the group gathers more tightly. The fire becomes central. Light fades, stars appear, and this is where something magical, but still very quiet, happens. Humans start imagining. We have evidence of cave paintings dating back over 30,000 years in places like Lascaux in France and Chauvet Cave. Paintings of animals, symbols, handprints. These were not random doodles. They required planning, pigments, intention. After a long day of gathering and walking and repairing tools, someone crawled into a cave and painted, which tells you something profound. Early humans did not spend every waking second worrying about survival. They had time to create, time to decorate, time to think about things that were not immediately edible. Some evenings might include music. Simple flutes made from bone have been discovered, dating back tens of thousands of years. Imagine that, a small group, firelight flickering,
someone playing a soft, airy melody on a bone flute. It's not a concert hall, it's not recorded, but it's music. And then, slowly, people sleep. Probably in shifts in some cases, especially in areas with predators. But sleep comes. No scrolling, no late-night doom spirals, just darkness, fire embers, breathing. And that was a day. Not glamorous, not cinematic, but deeply human. Now here's where it gets quietly interesting, because different environments shaped different rhythms. Early humans in Africa near rivers might have more stable food sources year-round. Groups in Ice Age Europe had to adapt to colder climates, more planning, more preservation of meat. In coastal regions, shellfish became important. Shell middens, ancient trash heaps of shells, show that some groups feasted heavily on seafood, which again is not dramatic, it's just steady. Collect, eat, discard, repeat. And over generations, these daily routines slowly shaped culture. Not kings, not empires, just repeated small acts. Wake, gather, share, tell stories, sleep. There were no weekends, but there was also no office, no rent, no royal cousin marrying another royal cousin because diplomacy. In fact, early human groups were small, maybe 20 to 50 individuals. Everyone knew everyone, which means social harmony mattered. You couldn't just dramatically storm off and start a rival kingdom. You had to work things out. Anthropologists believe many hunter-gatherer societies were relatively egalitarian, no massive power hierarchies. Leadership was situational. If you're good at tracking, people listen during a hunt. If you're wise with plants, they listen when someone's stomach hurts. It wasn't perfect, humans are still humans, but it was flexible, and perhaps a little less bureaucratic. So when we ask what early humans actually did all day, the answer is almost disappointingly calm. They worked a few hours for food, they maintained tools and clothing, they cared for children, they socialized, they created art, they rested, they survived, but not in constant panic, more in steady rhythm. And as we gently close part 1 of our slow drift into prehistory, let yourself sit with that. For tens of thousands of years, human life was not about emails or quarterly reports. It was about walking familiar paths, watching the sky, listening to stories beside a fire. Tomorrow, we'll continue floating through time. We'll talk about seasons, about migration, about how boredom may have quietly invented civilization. But for now, just imagine the firelight flickering, the soft murmur of voices, and a world moving at the pace of footsteps. Sleep well.
If you drifted off somewhere between the bone flute and the mammoth not being hunted today, that's perfect. That's exactly the speed we want. Tonight, we're continuing our slow walk through early human life. No empires, no royal scandals, just people, very old people. Not personally old, just historically. In part 1, we floated through a typical day. Wake up, check the fire, gather food, prepare a hide coat because winter does not care about your feelings. But life wasn't just about single days. It was about seasons, and seasons changed everything. Early humans lived by rhythms we've mostly forgotten. Not calendar apps, not fiscal quarters, but the tilt of the earth, the migration of herds, the ripening of berries. Spring, for example, wasn't just pretty flowers, it was relief. After a lean winter, when food stores might be thin and everyone is slightly cranky from cold winds, spring meant new growth, fresh plants, baby animals, movement returning to the land. Groups might shift camp to follow this abundance. And here's something important. Migration didn't mean chaotic wandering. It wasn't, let's just walk that way and hope for the best. It was patterned. Early humans knew their territories deeply. Rivers, valleys, hills. They moved in cycles, returning to familiar locations year after year, almost like a memory loop written into the landscape. Summer was often the season of relative plenty.
Longer days, more food sources, fishing, gathering, small game hunting. Coastal groups might spend hours collecting shellfish at low tide. Inland groups might focus on ripening fruits and nuts. There was time to strengthen social bonds, because survival wasn't only about calories, it was about cooperation. Some anthropologists suggest that larger gatherings happened seasonally, small bands meeting others they hadn't seen in months. Picture that for a moment. After weeks in a group of 30 familiar faces, suddenly you meet another group of 30. New stories, new skills, new gossip about who accidentally set a shelter on fire last winter. These gatherings likely served important purposes: exchanging tools, sharing knowledge, arranging partnerships or marriages, because genetic diversity matters, even if no one at the time was using the phrase genetic diversity. They just knew you shouldn't marry your sibling, a solid start for humanity. Autumn, though, was different. Autumn was planting season. Animals were fatter, nuts were ready to harvest and store. This was the time to prepare for winter. Drying meat, smoking fish, storing roots underground, repairing shelters, sewing warmer clothing. This wasn't frantic panic, it was steady preparation. And then winter arrived. Now, winter varied wildly depending on geography. In Africa, winters were mild. In Ice Age Europe, they were not mild, they were aggressive. Groups in colder climates had to cluster more tightly, fires burned longer, movement reduced. But even winter wasn't constant misery. There were slower days, more time inside shelters, more storytelling. This is where long myths likely flourished. When nights stretched and darkness lingered, imagination filled the gaps. Spirits, ancestors, animal beings with human traits. Religion, or at least spiritual thinking, didn't appear suddenly in a palace chapel. It grew quietly around fires. Burial practices give us clues. Neanderthals buried their dead intentionally, sometimes with flowers. Homo sapiens did the same. That suggests something profound. They thought about death. They paused for it, which means part of their day sometimes involved grief. Not dramatic Shakespearean grief, but quiet human grief. Sitting near a grave, remembering someone's laugh or the way they always complained about cold mornings. Even in prehistory, people mourned, and they carried on. Now let's gently talk about something modern humans love to romanticize: freedom. We imagine early humans as totally free, no bosses, no taxes, no deadlines. And yes, in many ways, life was less structured. But freedom came with constant awareness. You had to know your surroundings, notice weather shifts, recognize animal tracks. There was no grocery store if you forgot to plan. There was no emergency hotline. Responsibility was shared, but it was real. Still, studies of modern hunter-gatherer societies suggest something striking. Stress levels may have been lower than in many agricultural or industrial societies, because needs were immediate and visible. You were hungry, you gathered food. You were cold, you added fur. There was no abstract anxiety about retirement accounts, just practical problems with practical solutions. And here's another thing early humans did all day. They observed, carefully. Bird patterns, cloud shapes, subtle changes in plant growth. This observational skill was not optional, it was survival. But it also shaped intelligence. Humans became masters of pattern recognition, which later helped us invent farming and cities, and eventually meetings that could have been emails. But we're not there yet. Right now, we're still in the long stretch of prehistory, where days were repetitive in the most soothing way. Wake, eat, move, talk, repair, rest, repeat. No massive monuments, no royal drama, just continuity. And within that continuity, creativity. Cave art wasn't the only expression. Beads made from shells and bones have been found dating back over 70,000 years in Africa, which means someone, at some point, thought, you know what this hide tunic needs? Accessories. Adornment suggests identity, maybe status, maybe beauty, maybe just preference. Early humans weren't blank survival machines. They had taste. They likely had humor, too. It's hard to imagine humans without jokes, even gentle teasing around a fire, someone exaggerating a hunting story slightly, others rolling their eyes. Human nature doesn't change that much. Now, let's gently talk about children again. Children were central to daily life. They weren't separated into institutions. They learned by being present, watching tool making, following adults on short foraging trips, playing games that mirrored adult tasks, throwing sticks at targets, practicing balance, pretending to track imaginary animals. Play wasn't separate from work, it was preparation. And elders played a vital role. Grandparents, especially postmenopausal women, may have significantly supported food gathering and childcare. Some researchers call this the grandmother hypothesis, meaning your ancient grandma might have been the quiet backbone of the group, not flashy, but essential. So when we ask what early humans did all day, we start to see a pattern. They maintained relationships, they maintained knowledge, they maintained tools, they maintained fire. Maintenance is not glamorous, but it builds civilizations, slowly, almost accidentally. And that might be the most fascinating part. For tens of thousands of years, humans lived this way. Small groups, seasonal movement, shared resources, deep knowledge of local environments. Then, around 12,000 years ago, something began to shift. Climate stabilized after the last ice age, plants became more predictable, and somewhere, someone looked at wild grain and thought, what if we just stayed here? But we won't rush into farming yet. That's a whole different rhythm, a louder one. For now, we're still in the era of walking lightly across the land. No permanent thrones, no royal inbreeding scandals, just humans waking with the sun and sleeping with the stars. And as we gently close part 2, imagine the cycle continuing. Spring thaw, summer abundance, autumn preparation, winter storytelling, over and over, for thousands of years. Not boring, not thrilling, just steady, and maybe in its own quiet way, deeply balanced. Let your thoughts slow to that rhythm. Tomorrow we'll ease into the moment everything changed, when staying put started to feel like a good idea, and humanity's schedule got complicated. For now, rest by the fire. The night is long, and no one has anywhere urgent to be.
All right, get comfortable again. If part 2 ended with you gently imagining autumn nuts and winter storytelling, that's perfect. We're picking up right there. Still calm, still slow, still thousands of years before anyone invented a board meeting. But now, something subtle begins to shift. Not overnight, not dramatically. No trumpet blast from the sky announcing, "Retention, everyone! Agriculture is here!" It was quieter than that. For most of human history, people moved with the seasons. Small migrations, familiar routes, a steady rhythm of walking, gathering, returning. And then, around 12,000 years ago, as the last ice age loosened its grip, the climate stabilized. Temperatures warmed. Rainfall patterns became more predictable in some regions. This matters more than it sounds, because predictability changes behavior. When wild grains begin to grow reliably in the same valley every year, someone notices. They notice that certain seeds, when dropped near camp, sprout. They notice that staying in one place a little longer means less walking. And walking, while peaceful, is still effort. So imagine it. A small group near what we now call the Fertile Crescent, areas around modern-day Iraq, Syria, Turkey. People are still hunting and gathering, still living in small bands. But maybe this year, instead of leaving as soon as the grain is harvested, they linger. They clear a small patch. They scatter seeds intentionally. Not because they've invented
farming with a PowerPoint presentation, but because they're experimenting. Humans are curious, always have been. And here's the strange part. At first, agriculture did not make life easier. I know, it sounds like a great deal. Grow your own food, stay in one place, build a house. But farming meant more work. Instead of walking a few hours to gather diverse foods, you now had to prepare land, plant seeds, protect crops, wait, hope the weather cooperates. It required patience on a different scale. And once you plant crops, you can't just wander off casually. You're tied to that field, which means your daily routine changes. Early farmers woke up and checked crops instead of checking hunting tracks. They weeded, watered, guarded against animals. And guarding is not glamorous. Picture someone shooing away birds from a patch of barley for the third time that morning. Not exactly epic, but necessary. Permanent settlements began to form. Not cities yet, just clusters of huts, mud brick structures, storage pits. And storage changes everything. When you can store grain, you have surplus. When you have surplus, you have something to protect. And when you have something to protect, you might have disagreements. This is where daily life starts to include new tasks. Building stronger shelters, digging storage pits, maintaining boundaries. Early villages likely involved more structured labor. Instead of a loose band of 30 moving freely, you might have 100 people staying put. More people means more coordination. And here's something gently ironic. Hunter-gatherers often worked around 3 to 5 hours a day gathering food. Early farmers? Likely more. Agriculture is demanding. It bends your back. It ties you to seasons in a more rigid way. Miss planting season? That's a problem. Miss harvest? Bigger problem. So what did early agricultural humans do all day? Wake up at dawn, check animals if they had begun domesticating them, goats, sheep, feed them, keep them from wandering, tend fields, repair tools, now including early farming tools like digging sticks or primitive plows, process grain. Grinding grain into flour is labor-intensive. Imagine hours of repetitive motion with a stone grinder, back and forth, back and forth. Very meditative, very exhausting. Children's lives changed too. Instead of wandering wide territories, they grew up in more fixed spaces. They still played, still learned by watching.
But now, their environment included fields, storage huts, fenced animals. Elders still told stories by firelight, but those stories may have shifted slightly. Now there are tales about the harvest, about spirits of the land, about why you absolutely must plant at the right time or the sky gods will be mildly disappointed. Religion becomes more tied to land cycles. Fertility of crops, of animals, of people takes center stage. Small clay figurines appear in some early farming communities, possibly linked to fertility beliefs. Again, nothing dramatic, just humans trying to make sense of unpredictability. Now here's where daily life gets even more layered. Specialization begins. In hunter-gatherer groups, most adults knew how to do most tasks. In farming villages, some people began focusing on specific skills. One person might become particularly good at pottery, another at tool making, another at organizing storage. This isn't a job market yet, but it's the beginning of division of labor. And with division of labor comes hierarchy. Not instantly, but slowly. If someone controls grain storage, they hold influence. If someone leads rituals tied to harvest, they gain authority. This is the very gentle birth of social inequality. Not kings yet, but the first hints of structure. So daily life now includes something new: obligation. You may owe labor to maintain shared irrigation. You may participate in communal harvest days. Your time is less flexible. You can't just decide to walk off because the berries look better over the hill. You have crops, you have neighbors, you have expectations. And yet, even here, much of the day remains steady. Wake, work fields, prepare food, repair shelter, care for children, talk by firelight, sleep. The rhythm is still there, it's just heavier. Health also shifts. Early farmers often had less varied diets than hunter-gatherers, more reliance on grain. Skeletal evidence shows signs of nutritional stress in some early farming populations. So the trade-off becomes clear: more stable food supply, but harder labor; more community, but less mobility; and perhaps more conflict, because when you stay in one place, you can't avoid neighboring groups as easily. Territory matters more. Fields matter. Water access matters. Disputes likely became more frequent, still small scale, but real. So when we ask what early humans actually did all day during this transition, the answer becomes layered. They worked the land. They negotiated with neighbors. They experimented. They adapted. They invented routines that would eventually build cities. And all of this happened gradually. No single dramatic day where someone said, "All right, everyone, we're farmers now." Just small decisions. Stay one more season. Plant one more field. Build one sturdier house. Repeat until movement became the exception rather than the rule. And as villages grow slightly larger, you can almost feel history leaning forward, because once humans stay put, accumulation begins. Accumulation leads to complexity. Complexity leads to leadership roles. Leadership roles, well, eventually you get kings. But we're not rushing there. Not yet. Right now, it's still simple mud brick houses, still shared labor, still evenings by fire. But the fire is now inside a house that might still be there next year, which, for humanity, is a radical idea. As we gently close Part 3, imagine that shift. The first time a child grows up in the exact same place their parents did. The first time a storage pit holds enough grain to last the winter. The first time someone looks at a field and thinks, "This is ours." That thought changes everything, but it changes it slowly, quietly, over centuries. And tomorrow we'll drift further into the rise of larger villages, into the earliest hints of status, power, and maybe the first person who thought wearing extra beads meant they were slightly more important than everyone else. For now, let your mind rest in that in-between moment, half wandering, half settled. The world is still mostly wild, but the roots are beginning to dig in, and humanity is about to get very, very busy.